Welcome to the Life's Best Medicine podcast, where we are finding hope and healing one episode at a time. No appointment needed, no rubber gloves, and no copay. Just a healthy dose of life lessons to help equip you for this wild journey we call life. Hey everyone, this is a friendly reminder that we are here for entertainment purposes only. We may not even be that entertaining at times, but this is not medical advice. Talk to your doctor, check with your healthcare professionals before making any lifestyle changes or medicine changes. What we're talking about is our clinical experience and what we've seen. And so if you really want our advice, you can consult us. You can actually consult me as a doctor, or you can consult my guest and get all your questions answered. But we can't give free medical advice because we can't pay our bills with that. But we can help to educate you a bit and allow you to think a little bit. And always reach out to your medical professional before making any lifestyle changes. Thank you.
Discover a new path to wellness at Arizona Metabolic Health. Dr. Brian Lenskis offers advanced medicine and personalized care, treating the root causes of your health concerns, not just the symptoms. Whether you're seeking direct primary care, effective diabetes management, or medical weight loss, with a holistic approach, our team is here to guide you every step of the way. Visit ArizonaMetabolicHealth.com today to learn more about our innovative health solutions.
Okay, everyone, this is the danger area, November. Guess what? The holidays are coming up. They're upon us. So when everyone's eating all that bad stuff and Aunt Betty's making her cookies and cake and all that stuff, go to Health Code. Let that be the sweet alternative for you. They have great protein, great nutritional value. So you can feel like you're cheating, but you're actually helping yourself out. So Health Code, GetHealth, GetHLTH.com. We have a discount code with them, MetHealth, MET for metabolic health, METHEALTH. And they're a great company, so continue to support them, and we just thank you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome back to the Life's Best Medicine podcast. I brought in a smarter kid than me today so we can all learn. Dr. David Cavan, he's done a ton of work with diabetes reversal, managing type 1. He's got books we'll talk about. But Doc, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me from across the pond.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to speak to you.
Why is it that you over there are way ahead of us? I mean, I learned a lot from Dr. Unwin and a lot of people in the UK. Why is it that you guys are like he was way ahead of the curve, and I started hearing him talk, and I'm like, I wonder about this guy. And then all of a sudden he's changing the world. And so Have you crossed paths with Dr. Unwin also?
Oh, yeah. Yes, we have indeed. And, to be honest, I almost have the opposite view because we're aware of people in the US who've been working in this area for some time. But we both, David Unwin and I, we both have quite similar stories, but from different viewpoints. My background is I'm a consultant endocrinologist, so my work has been diabetes almost exclusively for nearly 30 years, which makes me a very boring person if you're not interested in diabetes, but that's the way it is. And I was trained in the medical model and type 2 diabetes in particular. We need to manage it with medications, and eventually, because it's progressive and chronic, people will end up going onto insulin. And I had a light bulb moment around about 2011, 2012, which totally challenged my thinking about it. And so I sort of changed tack, and very much since then, and I can describe that light bulb moment in more detail, but very since then focused on lifestyle as a cornerstone of management of type 2 diabetes, and in particular to help people reverse it or put it into remission. And David Unwin, who is a primary care physician, I'm right down on the south coast of England, he's right up in the north. He had a similar journey in his primary care practice where a patient came to him having put herself on a low-carb diet and reversed diabetes, and that suddenly changed his practice. So we've had quite similar journeys, but from different parts of the country and from different parts of healthcare. but along the way, I've always been interested in developing resources to help people manage long-term conditions like diabetes. I've been involved in developing education programs. So about the time this started, I was invited to write a book to support people with type 2 diabetes. And I said, yes, I will, as long as I can make first and foremost this that then was new and very controversial message that type 2 diabetes can be reversed. And after a little bit of haggling, it was published, and right on the front page, on the title page, "Reverse Your Diabetes." That was back in 2014,
Wow.
and it predates nearly all the other books about reversal of type 2 diabetes, and it got me into I wouldn't say trouble, but a lot of eyebrows were raised amongst the physician
Especially as
establishment.
an endocrinologist, because most endocrinologists that I know in the
Yeah.
US just don't get it. Yeah, you talk to them and explain it and go,
Well,
it's
I know,
amazing.
and it's the same here. And I sort of think, well, am I living on a different planet to all these others? Because if you think about type 2 diabetes in particular, we know now beyond any shadow of a doubt it's a result of modern day lifestyles. And we can go into the detail of that. So doesn't it make sense to really encourage and support people to change their lifestyle in order to manage the condition? And yet, most of the places I work now, I think it's fair to say I because I've been around a very long time, I have a certain amount of I'm not sure respect is the word, but people, yeah, I think respect what I do, but I think some of them still think I'm a bit out there, and a bit of a maverick.
Welcome to the
Um,
club. Yeah. When I started talking about that, my partner was an endocrinologist in my old practice, and
yeah,
he would just he couldn't imagine where I was coming from. I go, okay, let's grab some of our. We both were in the habit of collecting old textbooks, and he's like, what did they do in the 1800s? How did they
yeah.
manage it? And look at all the Osler, all these people were saying restrict carbohydrates until they're not peeing sugar anymore, and then that's the diet they should be on. And now it's
Well,
controversial.
exactly, and it's very interesting, isn't it? If you go back to um, well, certainly up until the 1930s in this country, carbohydrate restriction was the only way of managing diabetes, or certainly until insulin came. And then for many years after that, I've actually was lent a copy of a book written by um, one of the first diabetes specialists in the country in the UK, who himself had type 1 diabetes. And he was one of the first people ever to access insulin as a young child in the 1920s with type 1 diabetes. But his book from the 1960s, and you might want to edit this bit out because I've got an aging brain and his name has escaped me, but I'll remember it so we can put it back in. His book from the 1960s basically is a low carbohydrate diet for management of diabetes. And in those days, they didn't really distinguish between type 1 and type 2. So it was only really
Hmm.
from the 70s onwards that we got into this crazy low fat, high carb diet that we all know about, that has, if anything, aggravated and promoted this huge epidemic of type 2 diabetes since then.
And the reasoning was when people get fat, they get diabetes. They were making that observation. So, okay, if you eat too much fat, you're going to get fat. Like they just reasoned it out that way without really having data.
And it's staggering. It is absolutely staggering. And in the English language, we have the same word fat as a nutrient as the adjective to describe someone who's overweight. That isn't the case in other languages. But why did we link those two? And again, as research for one of my books, I actually looked back. Well, where was the evidence? Because I was challenged during the COVID lockdown. I did an online seminar on type 1 diabetes and use of carbohydrate restriction in type 1 diabetes, and I was challenged by quite a well-respected dietitian in the UK who said, "Well, where is the evidence to support the use of a low carb diet in type 1 diabetes?" And I turned it around and said, okay, where is the evidence for a high carb diet? And of course, I didn't get an answer. So I went out and looked for it. And the evidence that came in the 1970s, in particular, with some very, very small studies studies of very small numbers of people for relatively short periods of time. And one group had a lower carb diet, one had a higher carb diet, but the low carb was still well in excess of 150 grams of carbohydrates. So it's nowhere a real low carb diet. And all it showed was apparently those on a high carb diet had a slight reduction in cholesterol levels. Therefore, that's what we should be recommending. Very little about glycemic control or body weight or medication usage. And if you look back, you know, that sort of study that was published in a reputable journal, I think the British Medical Journal, it wouldn't get a look in anywhere nowadays. And yet this was the level of evidence that, you know, not that long ago, still certainly within my lifetime, was enough with the right political will or whatever else it might be to, you know, change medical practice wholeheartedly with very little science behind it.
Man, it's so interesting. Like, so Dr. Unwin was doing his stuff down there, you know, remote from, he never knew about your work and what you're doing in your book, right? So it's just amazing how independently you start saying, gosh, this is working. And I remember he took a lot of heat and you had to take a lot of heat as an endocrinologist saying, you're telling them not to eat like the low fat diet and they're diabetics and we know diabetics die of heart disease. So you're going to kill all your patients, basically, was the connection everyone made, right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
So was there anyone when you started looking at this, was there anyone else in your camp there around you? Or were you
No,
like the you
no,
were it?
I was very, and this the status in the UK of someone in my position is, you know, I'm as a consultant, that's quite a senior doctor, and you have a lot of freedom and autonomy. So you know, there wasn't someone who could tell me no, no, you can't be
Mm,
doing that or whatever. I just got on and did it. But it certainly challenged, and the group who have always felt most challenged, in my experience, have been dietitians, because they have been trained, or at one point they were trained, that you have to have 130 grams of carbohydrate as part of your diet every day because the brain uses 130 grams of glucose every day. That's sort of how it came about. And in the early days, I just stopped sending people to dietitians. You know, I said, well, if I send you to a dietitian, they'll tell you to eat more potatoes. And so often they'd come back to me and said, oh, she said I should eat more potatoes and rice.
yeah, Mateo's rice and eat 6 times a day to keep your sugars balanced,
Yeah,
super
yeah,
high, but balanced in
yeah,
the 280
yeah,
range. It's
yeah.
incredible.
And it's incredible. So I just did my own thing, and my sort of light bulb moment came when, and the book I'm writing at the moment is about GLP-1 injections, Ozempic, Wegovy, and everything else. And the very first one of those that came out was called Byetta, that came out about
Mm, I remember that.
2007,
Yeah.
something. And it came with a huge amount of hype and promise that, you know, this is the first diabetes drug that will reduce your glucose levels, but it will also help you lose weight. And so, you know, I've been seeing patients in clinic and they've been on everything else. And I'd say, well, look, what about this drug? You have to inject it twice a day, but, you know, it's really good. Write out prescription, give them to it. If they didn't want injections, there was something called sitagliptin, which came out at about the same
Hmm.
time, DPP-4 inhibitor. So I was writing prescription after prescription for that. And, you know, they'd come back a few months later, and some of them did really, really well, but most of them, nothing had changed. And even those who'd initially done well, a year later, they were back at square one. And I honestly can't remember the exact point, but somewhere in that. So I began to therefore get very despondent about this whole idea that medications are the answer to it, because we had these fantastic new medications full of hype, full of hope, that didn't work. So I actually started asking people, well, what do you eat? And I put my hand up, and I do this in all sorts of seminars that I do, you know, in the preceding 20 odd years working in diabetes. I'd never asked that question because it wasn't my job. That was a dietitian's job. My job was just to write prescriptions and manage complications. And then when people told me what they were eating, I thought, well, is it any wonder? And because every single meal was very high in carbohydrates, there was often sugar in there. Um, and how on earth can any medication cope if every single time you open your mouth, you're filling yourself with foods that push up your glucose level? So that's when I just started suggesting to people, and I said, well, normally in this situation, I'd be prescribing another medication, but maybe we can try and avoid this if you're willing to make some changes to what you eat. And all I did was said, try and avoid sugar as much as you can, and try and avoid large portions of starchy foods. Base your meals on meat and vegetables rather than rice, pasta, and so on. And it worked. And I saw, at that point, I remember one lady who was on something like 60 units of insulin a day, which isn't a huge amount by today's standards. She was able to come off insulin, within a matter of weeks. Now that was unheard of. Now we're all used to that. Those of us working in this area, we know type 2 diabetes can be reversed. We can achieve complete or partial remission. People could come off insulin. But in those days, when you went on insulin, the story was you stay on it for life. And so to take people off insulin was just groundbreaking. And that's when it really excited me. And then that coincided with Professor Roy Taylor from the north of the UK, who did the original studies to demonstrate that type 2 diabetes can be reversed at a metabolic level. That coincided with his work being published. And so that sort of really was like put a rocket boosters under my enthusiasm. And I thought, well, okay, he's doing it by putting people on very low calorie diets to lose a lot of weight quickly. But he did it as an experiment, really. And it wasn't originally designed as a therapeutic intervention. It was an experiment to see if you could replicate the effect of bariatric surgery, but without the operation, just get people to lose a lot of weight. They lost their diabetes. But I just figured, well, if getting people to reduce their carbs with some very simple messages enables people to come off insulin, however you describe it, there has to be some reversal of the disease process to allow that. So that's what set me off on my journey. And
that's why. What year was your book published?
2014.
14. That's what I thought you said. Yeah, 2014. To say reverse, like it's still controversial when you say reverse diabetes, right? Because it's the management. But what's interesting is so many of these with the GLP-1 drugs, they go, don't change anything. As a matter of fact, I just picked up a really great family, and they've all struggled with weight and diabetes and pre-diabetes, and they all lost 40 pounds on one of these GLP-1 drugs, and then they gained back 60 when they came off it because they couldn't get it anymore because of the cost. And so I'm like, let's do it. And they're killing it doing low carb. They're doing unbelievably well, and they're so happy and they feel great. But they said not one doctor talked to them about lifestyle, like stress, sleep, and all that. When I was talking to them, they looked like they had never heard this before. It's amazing. Even if you looked at up to date and all these things on management of diabetes, they say, well, try lifestyle, but when that doesn't work, here's all the drugs. Here's the algorithm. It's like one line. It's not even even, they don't even say, hey, try cutting out your processed food and sugar and see what happens. And so
we in the UK, we have an organization called NICE, National Institute of Healthcare and Clinical Excellence, who publish management guidelines. And the type 2 guideline is about 80 pages. There's about 1 page on lifestyle. The rest of it is all medications. Now, in their defense, they were set up to regulate medications and to ensure that we get cost effectiveness for medications. And they do a really good job because the health service here pays a lot less than the rest of the world for drugs. But that's what people go on. Just by way of context as to how controversial it was then. I took a bit of a career break, and I spent 3 years from 2013 to 2016 working for the International Diabetes Federation as Director of Policy. And the book came out while I was in that role. And I was totally transparent. Before I was appointed, I said, you need to know I'm writing this book. It might be a bit challenging, and so on and so forth. And then when it came out, I just let everyone know that it was about to come out. The global board of the International Diabetes Federation, and as a director, I attended the board meetings. At the end of their meeting in 2013, no, 2014, yes, 2 months before this was published, they went into closed session to work out how they could stop me publishing the book. And it's just incredible. And I remember sitting outside.
And you were the head.
I remember sitting outside. I knew what they were talking about, and in that instant, I decided, well, if they don't want me as part of this organization, or me publishing the book, the book comes first. Now, as it was, they were told there's nothing they could do about it, but I was banned from using my sort of public position to talk about it. But it just goes to show, and I don't think the reaction will be so extreme now, but this is an organization that represents the national diabetes associations around the world, and where it has particular influence. In the US, you have the American Diabetes Association, and here we have Diabetes UK. They're very wealthy organizations, largely funded by pharmaceutical industry, which is a big issue. But where the IDF came into its own is in countries like Africa, where there's no resources, no drug companies put money into countries where people cannot afford to spend a lot of money on drugs. And so there was a dearth of good quality information, and the IDF was able to provide that. And yet, if anything, and this is why I was so passionate about trying to take these messages to Africa, if anything, the global explosion in type 2 diabetes is going to happen in Africa next. It's done the rest of the world. Africa is projected to double in the next 20 years. It is exactly the right place at the right time to get some key messages in about how you can not only prevent but reverse this condition, because individuals can't afford the drugs, health systems can't afford the drugs. And so the alternative is a nightmare of diabetes complications. And yet the message that could have supported that was sort of attempted to be silenced at source by the body that is meant to be supporting people with diabetes around the world.
That's the same thing we run to the ADA, and you look at their funding, they got pharma and big food. So if you say don't eat the big food, like, oh, just eat that, and then we do shoot you with this, and everyone's happy, and you get that doesn't really work. Like, that's not going to work. As a matter of fact, I had an in to go talk before the ADA, a friend of mine who's very connected with them, and they said, unless he's at a big university and published, we don't want to hear from him. Like, they wouldn't hear anything. But when you talk about clinical experience, like what you're saying, when I first started doing low carb stuff and I was struggling with weight, pre-diabetes, all that as a doctor, working out 6 days a week, eating the ADA's recommended diet, and I know it, and my sugars keep going higher and higher. I go, this is it. I'm going to get diabetes like the rest of my family. And then Jason Fung comes. One of my patients lost 40 pounds doing intermittent fasting and cutting out carbs a couple of days a week. And I'm like, this is crazy. And he said, I'm not hungry anymore. And that doesn't make sense. And you start realizing about insulin resistance, how it all works. And so many people are hostage to that. And you think, gosh, if we could just do this, you can, And so when I had 11 people come off insulin in 6 months, ultimately I resigned from that position. And the head doctor there called me and he goes, Brian, what's going on? Are you having a midlife crisis? I know how much money you made last year. And I said, I can't take it anymore because I had 11 people come off insulin. You guys don't care about that. You don't ask me one question. You won't let me talk to the other doctors about what I'm doing. We could save your institution your number one cause of bypass surgery is diabetes. Number one cause of amputation, diabetes. Number one cause of blindness. Everything you're spending money on, and you're saying I'm costing you money. How can that be? And he said, well, if they don't get diabetes, we don't get paid by the federal government the money for that diagnosis. So by getting rid of diagnosis, you cost the system money, their system directly, right? And you go, wow, what are we doing here then? Who's having the midlife crisis, you or me? Right? Because you're here what did you come to medicine to help people? And you go, gosh, if we can prevent, because we all know I hated diabetes because of all that, like seeing those chronic ulcers on the leg and the Una boots and wrapping the foot and amputations. And then, at that time I'm hearing about Tim Noakes and Gary Fettke going through all these trials. And you think you're going through trials for telling people not to eat processed foods? How can this be for a doctor? Well, you can't talk about that if you're a doctor or a surgeon.
Yeah.
It's just incredible.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And it's, I heard from colleagues in Germany, and Germany is a country where there are very strict rules about everything in their national
Yeah.
life. But you know, and I was not talking to a doctor, but someone who talked to a doctor who told me that as a doctor you cannot talk about diet. That's not your job. Your job, that's a dietitian's job or a nutritionist's job. And so, if I was in that sort of situation, I'd find it really very difficult. I mean, I'd probably ignore the rules, but in somewhere like that, that could have consequences. Fortunately, I live in a much more liberal situation in terms of clinical freedom, but it is staggering. It is really staggering, the point we've got to, as you say, where we have health systems dependent on illness and procedures and diagnoses, and they get their money through that rather than through keeping people healthy.
Yeah, it's incredible. It really is incredible. The more you're around, you think, gosh, how much, like in your situation, I was wondering how much is conflict of interest or how much they legitimately thought this guy's doing crazy stuff, saying we know low fat's going to help, but no one gets better. No one got
Yeah,
better on the ADA's recommended diet. No, I've never saw anyone say, hey, I don't need my medicines anymore. They needed more. It was just, what medicine am I adding on next? What medicine am I adding on next? Now we're saying, oh, what medicine can we take away each time,
well,
right?
exactly. And I still meet with in the local area here where I work. I sometimes meet with challenges, and um, the good thing is that in the 12 years since I first wrote about this, people do accept that type 2 diabetes can be put into remission. There's now no longer an argument. In those days, it was quackery, even though there was scientific, evidence for it. Now it's accepted, but it's very difficult and people can't keep it up with it and so on. So it's still sort of out there
It's
for the real enthusiasts, but most
Yeah,
it's
it's
not for most people.
non-sustainable. We hear that all the time.
And but one of the arguments I use when I talk to local clinicians is that um, if you believe that remission is a thing, then look at the evidence. There is no evidence anywhere of people achieving remission through a low-fat diet in any published studies that I'm aware of, and I've done a lot of looking.
Unless they did a super low calorie and they lost a bunch of weight, right? They had to put
The,
on
the,
like
the,
fat,
yeah,
which
the,
wasn't
sorry,
healthy also.
yeah, the evidence is for a very low calorie diet, which is a
Yeah.
short-term intervention. And obviously, you can't stay on 800 calories for life, or low carb. Um, and that actually gets people's attention. But yeah, the default but I think things are very much changing over here, and there is more of an acceptance that reducing carbs is beneficial. And one of the biggest things that has helped that is the use of CGM systems, where and in the UK, they're only available for people on insulin, so type 1 diabetes or type 2s on insulin. But I encourage all my patients with type 2 diabetes to buy them themselves. They're not very expensive.
Yeah, that's
They're
what we do also, Doc, is like, people pay it's like 75 to $100 for a month. And it's the best education you
well,
get
and
for sure.
exactly, and seeing then immediate the effect of your healthy complex carbohydrate causing a really high glucose spike. And I think all the doctors who are seeing that now, they're going to have to realize that actually suggesting people don't eat those foods that cause those spikes has to be a good thing. So I think the advent of CGM is going to help accelerate the move towards lower carb.
Yeah, my old job, I had the opportunity. I had one of the head nutritionists at my hospital and a head nutritionists at the other hospital that were the diabetes educators. And I'd ask them, how's things? Oh, it's terrible. We have these crazy low carb people coming in and, they don't want to eat the sugar. They don't want to eat the food we're giving them. And I go, really? Have you ever tried a CGM before? I have samples. Let's try it. So I got each of them on a continuous glucose monitor. I said, do 1 week of what you're recommending and then do 1 week of what we're recommending and see what happens. And at the end of 2 weeks, they both called me and said, what do I do now? What do I do? Because they saw the difference in themselves and they're healthy, right? And so you think, wow, so it got them thinking at a minimum. So I think a lot more people are understanding. I think when you start seeing the results and you say, look, here's all my patients who came off off insulin. And the other interesting thing, and I would love to hear your take on this because it was extremely controversial when we talked about it maybe 6 years ago, was we were seeing our patients were trying to reverse their diabetes, getting them on a low carb diet. Then the big side effect we were seeing, people were saying, my mood is so much better. I don't get as stressed. I'm sleeping better. I'm not fighting with my coworkers as much. Are you seeing the same thing?
Yes, I am. And it's interesting. I did along the way, about 8 years ago now, I spent some time in Bermuda, small island nearer you than it is to me in the Atlantic, with very high rates of diabetes. And we set up a low carb program there, and that's where I was getting people coming back telling me, yeah, all these things, everything is improving. Not only am I coming off my diabetes meds, blood pressure meds, gout meds, ED meds, um, it's just incredible. And that is a very, very high sugar society, and there are some very quick wins just by trying to encourage people not to drink sugar. Kool-Aid was something that was very, we don't have that over here, but I looked at, it's so full of sugar.
Oh, yeah.
And being a hot country, they were just drinking the Kool-Aid the whole time. And I remember one young guy, he wasn't even 20, but he was on insulin, but of course he wasn't taking it. Large amounts of insulin had been prescribed. And he was living off Kool-Aid. And I said to him, I said, well, look, how about if I say you don't need to inject insulin, are you willing to try and stop drinking the Kool-Aid? And it worked. And, even to me, with years of experience in diabetes, seeing how a change in diet can have a massive effect, especially if it's a very high sugar diet, it's a real eye-opener. So I'm deviating from what you're asking, but yeah, mood changes, brain fog, however people describe it, less irritable, sleeping better.
Yeah, and all those things play a
All
role.
of it.
Yeah, they all play a role, and you
It's
see that
win, win, win,
cycle.
win, win.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
win-win-win, and you see it, and people think you're crazy because I know there was a movie called The Magic Pill, and I was in a movie called Fat Fiction with some of my patients, showing the difference between the ADA's diet and what we're doing, and it was mind-blowing. But the interesting thing about that is they cut out the part when they had all my patients up on stage and they were asking them, they said, Doc, you sit here and just be quiet, let us interrogate the people, right? And so they were asking him questions about everything, and the first lady, who's I've been taking care of for 18 years at that point, she developed diabetes, and then we reversed it, right, with through lifestyle. And so they said, how would that feel when you lost weight? How was your, and she said, you know what, that's great, I lost weight, I came off insulin, all that that's good, but my mood. And I started seeing the birds singing, and like I walked out of a fog. I'd been in my entire life depressed because I've always eaten terrible. I had no exercise. Now I'm exercising because I enjoy it. I want to go see my neighbors, I'm talking to people. I used to be like in my house not cleaning, and I clean my whole house, and I'm have energy. And the next guy started crying, said that all five of them said the same thing. It was the mood was the biggest thing that affected their life. But they cut it out of the movie because it was too controversial at the time. They said, no, we're just talking about reversing diabetes, or getting, putting it into remission. And it was amazing. So I just ran into the producer and at a conference. I said, so what's your next thing you're doing? And she said, oh, she already did one on cholesterol with Dave Feldman, right? And now she's doing one on mood, metabolic and mood. And I said, that's so funny. It's on your floor at in your office somewhere, the cut of my patients, which was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen. And she goes, yeah, I think that might make it into the show. Right. So, you start seeing, because it was so, people can't connect. I mean, you start saying, gosh, how much of the depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia, how much of that is from poor metabolic health and nutrition, and gut health too? It plays a role in all
Well,
this.
yeah, I mean, that raises the whole very exciting world of metabolic psychiatry that just, being in this area, I hear people, um, Georgia Reed is one of the ones, isn't
Yeah,
she?
and Chris Palmer Chris
Chris
Palmer,
Palmer,
Georgia Ede,
you
and
know,
yeah.
and there's a guy over here called Ian Campbell doing amazing work. Um,
Yeah, and
uh,
Ian Campbell, I just met. We just interviewed him. Fantastic, doing a ton of work too. Who has
yeah,
bipolar?
yeah, exactly. And it's mind blowing. So literally, you just realize how um, we've compartmentalized medicine and metabolic medicine by treating the symptoms of the organ that's affected. So obviously, if you get high blood pressure, we use medication to reduce the blood pressure rather than dealing with the underlying cause. If you get erectile dysfunction, we treat you with Viagra or whatever to treat the symptom rather than dealing with the underlying cause. And lo and behold, mental illness affecting the brain, largely, in many cases as a result of metabolic dysfunction, but we treat the symptoms by changing the chemicals in the brain by medication, but doesn't deal with the underlying
Very
cause.
interesting. I just had a very interesting discussion with Ian Campbell, and he was talking about that with the manic part of bipolar and schizophrenia. It's an oversupply of energy to the brain, and the brain's just firing on all cylinders, doesn't know what to do, and it's jumping from thought to thought to thought. And he said a lot of historically, when you go back historically, they tried to slow down the metabolic rate. They would put people in ice baths or wrap them in cold towels, trying to slow it down to get those manic episodes better. They saw that that was working, like before we had meds and stuff. And then chlorpromazine, I think it was the one he was saying that they use it for when they're inducing anesthesia, and it would slow the metabolic rate down. So now all of our drugs that slow metabolic rate down affect the brain, but then you gain a bunch of weight and you get diabetes. So then it's a tough situation. So he said that's why low carbs is the perfect solution, because your brain runs smoother and cleaner on ketones than it does on sugar. And so cutting that out, but a lot of people will cycle during, like when they're eating more sugar in the holidays. My mom had bipolar disorder, and I know it was always the holidays. Once she started eating bad again, then all of her manic mania would kick in.
Isn't that interesting?
And it's very interesting. It has to do with the light of day and how long you're outside and all. There's so many factors involved. So, what are some of the things you've learned over the years that you could share with us that work for helping to reverse type 2 diabetes? And you also wrote a book on type 1 diabetes, also
Yes.
management.
Yeah. So being a hospital physician, most of my work was with patients with type 1 diabetes. That's just the way it works here. But type 2 is generally managed by.
And plus, type 1 was so scary for us primary care. We said, go to endo. We don't want to deal with it. Go.
And and I just started translating my experience with type 2 into type 1. And for people who are interested and took it on board, it works really, really well. But where it gets really interesting with type 1 diabetes, and again, I've written a book on type 1, so I did a lot of research into this. None of this stuff they teach you in medical school. But what is clear, and as my understanding and the way I describe it to patients, is that if you have type 1 diabetes, you need insulin injections. That's a given. Okay. Our understanding at the moment is it can't be reversed, so you need insulin injections. But by injecting insulin from the outside into the subcutaneous tissue, into the periphery, as soon as you give that first injection, you're giving people hyperinsulinemia. Because the peripheral insulin levels in type 1 diabetes are much higher than someone who doesn't have diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're essentially giving them, alongside their type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes, you're sowing the seed for hyperinsulinemia, insulin resistance. And I would see so many people with type 1 diabetes who are diagnosed in childhood or in their 20s. By the time they're in their 40s, they're really overweight. They're putting in more and more insulin, their glucose levels are staying high, and then they're in exactly that same cycle.
And that's the point. It's so crazy. They're saying, hey, eat whatever you want and we'll adjust your insulin to take care of that. So they look at the blood for the sugar being low, but it's all shoved into your fat cells, your tissue, your liver, and then you need more and more to get rid of the extra sugar. You get insulin resistant, which we've never seen until now.
Yeah. And so absolutely. And so and again, CGMs are great because people can see, they're doing everything they're being asked to do. They're adjusting their insulin to match the carbs in their meal. They're injecting it, bolusing it 15 minutes beforehand, and yet it doesn't do what it says on the tin. Their glucose level still shoots up, to really high levels and comes down. So it's a great opener to people saying, well, look, if you want to improve your time in range, then just choose to eat the foods that don't do that. Oh, and by the way, they're going to be the ones which are more protein and less carbs, so you'll be injecting less insulin. And you know what? You've been talking so many years about how you really struggle to lose weight, and everyone thinks it's because they haven't got time to exercise or go to the gym. And I say, I don't want you going to the gym. I just want you to help. Suggest you focus on eating the foods that keep your CGM within range, and then you'll be putting in less insulin, and then you lose weight. And then when you get the energy, if going to the gym lights your candle, that's fine. But if not, do whatever exercise you like. So so um, reducing carbs for any type of diabetes, any type of metabolic syndrome, any of these other things that we've talked about, obesity without diabetes. A huge number of people with obesity are insulin resistant. They're just genetically or metabolically better able to control their glucose levels, so they're not diabetic, but they're storing up all the other problems. So in terms of general of experience, it is to encourage people to avoid sugar, to avoid large portions of starchy carbohydrates. And I only put it that way. I used to get a lot of criticism, less so now. But 5 or 10 years ago, there was like, well, there's a keto diet and it's 30 grams a day, and if you're not doing that, you're not doing it properly, and you haven't seen the light. And I used to see comments where people would be writing about me and my books and saying how terrible I am because I don't put numbers on it. I don't say you've got to have 30 grams a day. I just say you make the changes at a pace and an extent that works for you.
Yeah.
And in order to meet your goals.
Yeah, that makes it manageable, because if you make it too restrictive, people go, forget it, I'm not doing it. So if you go, let's cut this out first, and let's see what happens if we get rid of the soda and the orange juice and the lemonade.
And I would exactly, and I give the example of when I first started reading into this, probably 15 plus years ago. I used to drink orange juice. We had orange juice in the fridge. It's healthy, it's natural, it's full of vitamin C, all that stuff. And I'd pour out big glasses and I drink it very regularly. And it was only, I read a book called Escape the Diet Trap by a guy called John Briffer, who was a nutritionist in London, amazing book. And it just another light bulb moment. Orange juice is a sugar sweetened beverage. It's just like soda, but without the fizz.
Mm-hmm.
And so I just said, I'm never going to drink orange juice again.
And you think about, that's the advice we give our diabetics. If their sugars go low, if they shoot too much insulin, say drink orange juice right away, so you raise your sugars. So we don't want to do that.
Well, so in that situation, then you can see it can have a therapeutic point. But there was one point, the food guidelines, where it's called the Eat Well plate over here. It used to have orange juice as one of your 5 a day, fruit and veg. Thankfully, they've taken it out now. But the point I'm making is that for me was a very easy win. And I stopped drinking. I didn't miss it. If I had a sugar addiction, maybe I'd have missed it. So I just say to people, think what is a one change that you could make, that you think you could make, and it wouldn't be a problem. So don't try and change everything. Don't try and cut out everything all in one go. But just choose one thing to start with. Some people want to go cold turkey. They want to cut everything out, and
they've had it and they're ready to go and they're all in.
Other people, and you just say, well, look, and often I'll see people's CGMs, and in fact, I saw someone yesterday. She had a really big spike in the mornings, and she was drinking three lattes, 3 milky coffees, regularly every morning. It hadn't even occurred to her that could be an issue. And I said, well, what are you eating for breakfast? It's really big spike. I don't have breakfast. And it was that, okay, well, now you can see that. Are you able to maybe try 2, or have a regular coffee with just a dash of milk? But now you've got that information, you can make your own choices, your own decisions.
And that's why it's kind of crazy that the insurance won't pay for the continuous glucose monitor until you're on insulin. It's like, well, our whole point is, if we prevent you from going on insulin, how much money do we save the system, right? And so it seems like I have a good friend. He's Italian. He goes, Doc, you know what? I'm just gonna die sooner. I don't care. I'm okay with that. I love my cannolis and I love my pasta and my pizza. And I go, okay. I go, let's just put this on for 2 weeks and see what happens. And so this guy, he reversed his diabetes. He got everything better because he said, I couldn't take it. He goes, this stupid thing messed up
Yep.
my brain because I couldn't enjoy it anymore. When I saw it was making my sugar go to 380, it's like, forget it. I don't want that. If I have some strawberries and some cream, it doesn't do anything. He said, I feel so much better. And he goes, and then he lost 30 pounds and his energy and his mood, everything got better. His inflammation, his joints got better. All these things that we see, you go, wow, this is cool. That it's such an important thing. So this guy was on the road to being on insulin. Now he's never going to go on insulin if he changes it, if he continues doing his lifestyle, you know?
You make a really valid point, and it is again one of the bizarre paradoxes of health systems that. But I suspect that might change because one, the costs are going to come down, and two, I think enough people, well, they're buying it themselves because they see the benefit of it, and I think payers will realise that this is actually a cost-effective intervention to provide CGMs,
Yeah.
even if you do it for 2 weeks, every 3 months. Some of my patients who are
Yeah.
self-pay, they can't afford to do it all the time. So, well, look, buy one every 3 months, put it on, use it to recalibrate, get yourself where you want to be.
And it's a funny thing because my patients will tell me that they'll say I was doing something and my CGM fell off, and then for 2 days I ate sugar all day because I knew you couldn't see it. But when they put it on, they feel like, oh, I don't want him to see it when we talk. He's gonna go, what happened last Wednesday? And so it does make it. And some people, they're just competitive with themselves. They look and say, well, I don't want my sugars doing this, and it's for them. They don't even have to share it with me. But some people, it's that accountability of saying, oh, just think about if Alcoholics Anonymous had a alcohol monitor
Yeah,
on, and you can call
yeah,
right
yeah.
away and go, hey, looks like you're drinking alcohol. What's going on? Let me come talk to you and see what we can do before you get drunk and wreck your car and kill a family. So there's so much we can do, and it's amazing your work. And I wasn't aware that you were so far ahead of the curve on this. It's so amazing how all these different people in different areas were kind of seeing the same thing. It was the same thing. I had my eye opener with one of my patients who lost 40 pounds just doing cutting down carbohydrates and fasting, eating 500 calories, all protein one day or 2 days a week. And you go, wow, this is crazy. How can this possibly be? Because you think if you fast one day, you should eat twice as much the next day. But when he lowered his insulin, he said, I wasn't even hungry. I didn't feel like eating. I was forcing myself to eat stuff. I was like, wow, that's weird. Because so many people are hostage to this hunger, chronic hunger all the time. What's my next
Well,
snack? What's my next meal?
absolutely, and bizarrely, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I think it's not by design. But if you think back to the traditional advice for people with diabetes, eat small, very regular meals throughout the day, so you're constantly feeding yourself. You're never allowing your insulin levels to drop. So you're never going to experience lack of hunger.
Yeah.
Um, so it becomes then the self-fulfilling prophecy. So so there's so much. It's such an exciting time. I mean, I'm getting on a bit. I'm heading towards when I'm not going to be working for years and years longer. But I think for people interested in metabolic medicine who are researching at the moment, it's such an exciting time because we can really really build upon what we've learned in the last 10, 15 years, and disseminate it using the tools like CGM to really support people with a whole host of health conditions.
Yeah, it's amazing. It is amazing looking at root cause, saying, okay, if we can fix this metabolic stuff, what else gets better? And we're stopping meds all the time rather than putting people on. I know pharma is not happy to hear that, but it's true, but people are doing better. And so your pioneering work is it's just incredible to me that what you've done. So tell people. Oh, before we do that, I was gonna say how do we find you, but let's talk a little bit about the third world. They're using your references in Africa and trying to help people with diabetes. And are we seeing a different uh, population? So we were talking a little bit before we recorded about what I see in Guatemala, where if we get people some good nutrition, all of a sudden their sugars drop 200 points. Just having a good protein, or maybe it's the fiber that's in there. Maybe some of the vitamins are helping them make more insulin. I don't know. I'm going to figure it out this time because we're going to be able to check insulin levels. But in Africa, because there's people who are relatively thin compared to the U.S. that are getting type 2 diabetes. Is that what they're seeing? Also, they're malnourished and they're getting type 2 from that.
Well, there is a type of diabetes called malnutrition related diabetes, which I think the IDF actually has recently classified it as type 5 diabetes, and that is related to chronic undernutrition. And found commonly historically in Africa. I can't comment on whether that's what you've seen in Guatemala. But no, my experience working with an amazing guy called Daniel Katambo in Nairobi in Kenya is that the type 2 diabetes that he's seeing there is very similar to the type 2 diabetes that we all know. And it was very interesting.
It's insulin resistance rather than decreased production of insulin, like type 1.5.
And it responds to a low carb approach. And in 2019, he set up, based on a program that I developed, so we adapted it, and he set it up in Nairobi in Kenya. And it was really interesting. He worked in an NGO that catered for people without health insurance, no access to medicines, often living in the slums, and he set it up in a private hospital. And he ran a pilot over a year in 2019. And what to me was so encouraging is that both groups did equally well. There was the same messages about cutting out sugar, and over there the sugar is soda, it's Coca-Cola, it's everything else. You don't get Diet Coke in Africa. It's laden with sugar, and it was cutting out the sugar, cutting back. And bear in mind, this is a society where the staple diet is starch. They have this thing called ugali, which is made from corn flour that is on every single plate. But just showing how you reduce the size of that, you increase your veg, you increase your meat, and thankfully meat was not expensive, so there wasn't a cost issue, that people with very low incomes were able to improve their HbA1c very significantly, just as the people attending the private hospital. And obviously COVID then came, so the follow-up was disrupted. But he's still doing really great work out there. And the great thing there is, as I said earlier on, a lot of people cannot afford medications, even regular, you don't have to be very poor to not be able to afford medications. And I was staggered to see the prices of some medications that the patient has to pay in Kenya was higher than the health service has to pay in the UK. So, and yet salaries are a fraction of the amount. So people cannot afford medications. And so the only sustainable, realistic way of dealing with this type 2 diabetes issue in low-income countries is through lifestyle change, effective lifestyle change, adapted to the culture. So, he stood up and he said, there's no way I can advocate a ketogenic diet because people rely on starch as part of their staple, but we can reduce it, we can adapt it.
Yeah, exactly. Really, yeah, again, in Guatemala, it's like, okay, instead of 20 small tortillas a day, can we do 6? Can we get down to 4? And then they're seeing their sugars get better. And yeah, it's amazing what we can do. It's just the importance of education. It has to be the right education for people and culturally sensitive where it works for them, Say, hey, can you just do, and I'll tell you, Doc, this will be interesting too. This is actually very intriguing to me, is that in Guatemala too, the one thing is I'll get someone's finger stick and it'll be 300, it'll be high. And I'll ask them, because everyone eats black beans there, and I'll ask them, how do you make your black beans? The people with high sugars always say, oh, I only use vegetable oil. That's it. And the people who have good sugar control, they'll say, oh, I use manteca still. They use the lard. And their sugars are better. It's like, okay, like try that for a while and just see what your sugars do, because that's culturally, like, that fat is going to block some of the sugar absorption. And so they have better sugar control, but they think they're doing the wrong thing because they're just sticking with the old culture, right? But when you go in the store, you see vegetable oil everywhere, and you also see soda. Yeah, like you're saying, soda is the killer for us. In the inner city, I see people come in, they're diabetic. We check their sugar is 360, and they're drinking a soda. And I'm like, what? Why are you drinking soda? And they said, well, the doctors say we need that for energy so that we can exercise and lose weight. And you go, oh my gosh, your sugar, you don't need more energy. Your sugar is 380. You don't need that. Yeah.
it's very sorry, one other anecdote about in Kenya. It's very interesting that the demography is very different. So over here now, the worst obesity and rates of diabetes are associated with low economic status, poor diet, poorly nutritious um, diets. Over there, it's the opposite. It's the business classes who are getting, who are eating out at the restaurants, overeating, getting overweight, and developing type 2 diabetes, and driving cars, because a lot of the poor people just are still walking everywhere. And I heard this very sad story about the Masai Mara, so the tribes in, I can't remember which part of Kenya, but they're
Yeah.
very tall, they're very lean,
Yeah.
they live off essentially a carnivore diet. They're cow's blood, milk,
Yeah.
traditionally, and they walk everywhere, nomadic. And I said, well, they're always going to be okay, aren't they? And someone said to me, yeah, but, and I can't remember what it was called, but basically Uber now will operate in places like that on motorcycles. So even where there are no roads, out in the bush, you can get your cell phone, and instead of walking 3 miles, you get a bike ride. And
Yeah,
it's
and they're probably
taking,
taking them out to the store and getting sodas and bad food
well,
too.
and one thing I
You
learned
never know.
many years ago from colleagues in Africa, when we were talking about availability of insulin when I was working in global policy, is just about every single village in Africa will have a fridge with ice cold Coca-Cola, but they won't have a fridge for insulin.
Yeah, and they and also like in Guatemala, there's places the soda is cheaper than water. So people out of financial need, they are drinking soda, and you think, gosh, darn it, how do we help that problem? So education is all we can do, and continuous glucose monitors, whatever we can do to get education for people. And so, yeah, we'll carry the torch down there, and hopefully we can compare notes someday and see, what's actually helping, what supplements can help, what nutrition that we can possibly do, and hopefully we can learn from this. And so, what's life's best medicine for you? What keeps you going? Where do you go when times are hard? What do you turn to get strength?
So, well, that's a really good question. So two answers immediate come to mind. I'm very fortunate now to have 5 grandchildren, and all aged under 5 at the moment.
Wow.
And and there's very little better medicine spending time with a young child who really tells you what's what and keeps you
Oh
grounded.
yeah.
And the other thing is, I just love being outdoors, and I'm very lucky. I live very close to the coast. I can walk to the beach and just walk along the beach. It's not glorious sunshine like some of the beaches in
In San Diego.
in the US, San Diego. It's often windy and rainy, but just the expanse and the openness
Oh yeah.
and green spaces, it just does me very healing.
Oh yeah, that's good stuff because you're doing great work. And so tell people how they track you down on either social media or how they get in touch with you, find you, and then also and if you have a chance, I'll send you an email and maybe you could send me a link to all your books so people who are
Sure, yeah.
struggling with type 1 or type 2 can.
So thank you. So I don't do social media. I used to do Twitter. I do a little bit of X, but very little now because of the way it's sort of turning.
Yeah, with you.
And as I say that, I think, oh crikey, with politics, and I don't want to get into politics, but that's the way it is. I have a website which is called the diabetesdoctor.co.uk.
Awesome.
And everything anyone ever wants to know about me is on there, including links to my books, which are available on Amazon, also in the US. And as I said, the latest one coming out in the new year is about how to manage weight loss injections and come off them and not put the weight back on.
Doc, you haven't said again, but we'll get you over to Low Carb MD where we have more reach, and we'll talk about that before it comes out because that's critically important. In the US, we're up against it, so that will be really important how to safely come off and things we can do to mitigate some of the muscle loss and all the other things that we're seeing with it. So I'm looking forward to that one. You're on the cutting edge, Doc. It's so great to meet you finally, and thank you so much. This guy, everyone listening, this guy is so humble. He's like, I don't know if I'll be a good guest for you. I don't know if what you're gonna want to hear what I'm talking about. Dr. Unwin said the same thing, by the way. He goes, I'm gonna bore people. I go, I don't think so. I don't think so. So, it's just so great what you've done over the years, and standing strong for your patients and saying this is what's working. I don't care what everyone else thinks. And at some point in medicine, we got to come to that point where friends of mine who thought I was nuts a few years ago are calling me, go, hey, how do I check a fasting insulin? How do I do this? What are you doing over there? Because they're hearing my patients getting better. And diabetes is a nightmare for doctors. It really is, and for patients for sure. So to give hope and doing what you're doing and standing up to the storm and keep moving forward, it's amazing, Doc. So thank you for your contribution. And a lot of people don't know you here in the U.S. So I'm really excited to get the word out, and I know,
Well, if
yeah,
you can spread the word, I mean, you've got some really good guys, including your good self, of course, in the US. So I was told when I wrote my first book, I was told, don't expect any sales in the US because they only buy from US doctors. So if you
yeah,
can,
I don't think that's the
if
case
you,
anymore. I think a lot of people are coming around saying, look, they're tired of the system. They're tired of just getting a
if you
drug
can
thrown at
change that a
them.
little bit, that would be great. But
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
it's
So,
just, I'm so pleased you invited me to talk to you. It's been a great pleasure, and thank you very much.
oh, and thank you also. And everyone listening, be kind to yourself, be kind to others. This is like gold level. If you have someone with diabetes, seek out the doc here. And we're all working together and trying to get people healthier. And there's so much knowledge. And from an endocrinologist, we don't find endocrinologists that are willing to talk about low carb hardly ever. So this is a special treat for me. So thank you so much, and have a great night. And everyone, thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening to this episode. We greatly appreciate your support. We would greatly appreciate a positive thumbs up on all of the platforms like iTunes and Spotify or wherever you're listening. And we just thank you for our Patreon supporters. We greatly appreciate your help in getting this message out. We think there's a lot of important information, and hopefully this helps you. Have a great day, and thank you for listening, and thank you for your support.